What to make of the president's conversation with the Ukrainian president and Joe Biden's son Hunter's activity in the Ukraine? Hi, this is Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there are frankly so many details and so much gossip and various interpretations floating around about this story, but it's practically dominated the news this weekend. I'd like to keep this, if possible, on a higher plane, and we're going to have to deal in some speculation, much in the way that Senator Mitt Romney did when he said, if the president did this, and because he doesn't know whether the president did anything or not. So in case you have been not paying attention on an hourly basis to the news, it is reported that on July 25th, the president had a conversation with Ukrainian President Voldymyr Zelensky. And during the course of that conversation, the Wall Street Journal reports that the president said some 8 times that Zelensky should press the investigation into Hunter Biden, the former Vice President Joe Biden's son, and his connection with a Ukrainian gas company, a major gas company in the Ukraine. It is not clear, Bill, at this point, if there was any kind of quid pro quo. In essence, did the president say we would withhold or amp up our aid to you if you complete this? But Bill, at the very least, on the surface of it, let me ask it this way. Joe Biden had this relationship with his son while he was spearheading the Obama administration's negotiations with the Ukraine. President Trump is pressuring, apparently, Ukrainian government to investigate Hunter Biden. Who showed worse judgment in this case, the former vice president or the current sitting president of the United States?
I have to tell you, I don't see what the fuss is about. I mean, I really don't. First of all, it's not, when you say pressuring him, he's not saying you will look into this or else we're going to do that. So there's none of that. He said you should look into it. He maybe said it a bunch because probably he should look into it. To me, this is just a guy who's been raked over the coals for 2.5 years over allegations of collusion, which were never true, had no evidence for whatsoever. And the apparent evidence connecting Hunter Biden to influence peddling certainly seems stronger than the case that was finally I don't even know what word you would use.
The very point that you just brought up, that President Trump had just endured 2 years of investigation, this was the day after Robert Mueller testified before Congress on about his report. The next day, President Trump is on the phone having this conversation where he's essentially leaning on the Ukrainian president to push this investigation. Now, on the other side of that coin, you brought up the fact that Hunter Biden, the allegations against Hunter Biden may be significant. The position of the United States government at the time and the position that Vice President Joe Biden advanced was that the prosecutor in Ukraine should step down because he was corrupt. And so even if you think Joe Biden wanted that prosecutor out of there to get the heat off of his own son, it wouldn't have been out of sync with official U.S. policy on the matter anyway. And so that alone would make it very difficult to prove that Hunter Biden did anything wrong or that Joe Biden did anything wrong in pressing the case.
I honestly, seriously, do not understand this one. I'm not going to repeat what I just said, but certainly I think all of the fuss is about the fact that here's a guy who has actually decided to fight back using the tactics that have been used against him, which is the Donald Trump story. I don't see anything here that causes me any alarm, but I can see how having a person who is ready to actually call Democrats out for their influence and their collusion with Russia would cause some panic among people in the Democratic Party. Specifically, 2 people who I can think of come right off the top of my head. So to the degree that this seems somehow inappropriate is beyond me. There is some interesting and I think relatively strong evidence that Hunter Biden got involved with the Ukrainian government and that there may have been some influence peddling. Donald Trump didn't say have him hit. Donald Trump didn't say any of this. Doesn't say investigate Hunter Biden and come up with a guilty verdict or else we're not going to give you none of that.
Well, Bill, isn't there an implied quid pro quo in any case? I mean, you know what Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney who's now doing time in a federal prison, said that President Trump, or then Donald Trump, he speaks in code. He doesn't come right out and say what he means. And when somebody repeats 8 times that you should investigate Hunter Biden and at the same time holds the strings to the money that could be going to the Ukrainian government, isn't there an implied quid pro quo there?
Whether there's an implied quid pro quo there or not is not really irrelevant. I mean, it's not really relevant. If you and I have a business deal and you strongly hint that you would really like to go see Les Miserables or something like that, the only way that is actually a coercion is if you have the power to punish me if I don't send you tickets to Les Miserables.
And the president does have the power to punish the Ukrainian government by withholding funding.
So you're telling me that you think that is there any evidence that this was the case?
The president and his lawyers are explicitly saying there was no quid pro quo. But the question I'm asking does there have to be an open quid pro quo where somebody says, I'll get you those tickets if you'll do this for me? Or does the very fact that he's president of the United States and controls that funding and is pressing the Ukrainian government for this very thing that he wants to help himself personally, doesn't that imply a quid pro quo?
Well, I'm going to retreat back to the quaint old days of yesteryear and say if there is any evidence of Donald Trump forcing the Ukrainian government to do something like that, then let's see it. And if there isn't any evidence of it, then I'm going to assume he's innocent until proven guilty. I'm just going to this idea that anything that Donald Trump says or does has to be motivated by pernicious Forget motivation. I think I know what his motivation is, and I don't blame him for his motivation. I feel the same way. But if you're talking about the acts of the president, look, we're in an age when it doesn't really matter it only matters whether it's legal or not. I'm not entirely happy with that, but that's the age we live in. But until somebody can show that some kind of pressure was put on the Ukrainian government, other than, we ought to look into this, then I don't see where the harm is.
Well, I would say that you're really playing down, even on the face of it, you're really playing down what the president, when you say something 8 times, is not saying, gee, I think you ought to take a look into this.
Look, this isn't like hey, they did it, so it's okay if we did it too. Just as an example, okay, as an example of like off the cuff kind of, when the mic's off behaviors. This is not the same as when Barack Obama said to the Russian president, look, you need to back off and not give me any trouble until after the election, and then I can deal with you. That is an absolute quid pro quo bargain on tape, on camera, and everybody knew it. It was treasonous on top of it.
And this is what he whispered to Dmitry Medvedev, the foreign secretary of Russia.
On a hot mic. They thought the mic was off, but he says, you've got to, I want, this is my last election coming up, and I want you to back off, and I'll be in a much better position after the election to deal with this missile issue that the Russians didn't like. And the president said, I will inform Vladimir. And that was a straight quid pro quo deal on camera with video evidence about selling out America's resolve in position to a Russian position because Barack Obama wanted smooth sailing for his 2012 reelection campaign. So unless you can show me something like that, I don't see how you have anything really to get upset about. And even if you can show me something like that, I would like to know why this is okay to prosecute this president or whatever other reason, and it's not okay to do it to Barack Obama. I don't want to have to play by 2 sets of rules for the rest of my life. I don't like the fact that the rules have deteriorated. I don't like it at all. But the world we live in is the world we live in. And if I see President Obama on camera in his own voice making a deal like that, you're going to have to show me something that at least comes to that level before I'm going to get outraged about Donald Trump saying you might want to look into this investigation of Joe Biden's son, which looks pretty fishy from the first place. I don't see how that particular statement on Donald Trump's part, you ought to look into this. I don't see how that harms American interests in the way that Barack Obama basically saying, give me some flexibility here and I'll give you what you want after the election's over.
Well, the allegation is that it not so much that it would harm America's interests. In fact, even attackers of the president have said, we're not sure that short of a quid pro quo, we're not sure if this is illegal or even unethical. It just may demonstrate bad judgment. Now, not everybody's saying that. Some people are saying it is illegal, it is unethical, and it demonstrates bad judgment. But in any case, that question that you just brought up, the evidence, there is some dispute over how that should be handled. President Trump said, gee, I'd like to have the transcript of that conversation out there so that people could see that everything I did was on the up and up. Meanwhile, people in his administration are saying, no, we're not going to turn over the transcript of the president's conversation with another foreign leader because that would be an executive privilege issue and we don't want to set a bad precedent. Do you think the president should essentially, for want of a better term, declassify that, as his friend Lindsey Graham is saying, and get that information out there so people can see what he really said?
The fact that we're having this discussion, to me, is an indication of the perpetual witch hunt state that has happened since the first Tuesday in November of 2016. It is the nonstop, never-ending, ongoing witch hunt for some kind of anything that can be used to tear Donald Trump out of the White House and put in the person who was supposed to have won. And I'm really getting tired of it. Well, I'm getting so tired of it that I am actually find myself approaching places where I don't want to go, which is namely, you know what? At this point, I don't even care if it's true or not. I'm just so bloody sick of watching this slow motion coup that now if you really want to take this knife fight deep into the mud, then that's where we're going to go.
So, Bill, this is calling another federal official, somebody in a relatively previously little-known position, the Inspector General for the National Intelligence arm of the government, who came forward with this whistleblower's allegation of something that President Trump said on this phone call. Now, the coverage that I've read about this Inspector General is not that he's some sort of, as the Trump supporters would say, swamp critter. He, in fact, when they searched through his entire background, he's never made a political contribution to any presidential candidate and is widely known as a straight shooter, somebody who just calls balls and strikes. Now, Bill, don't you run the risk of getting into a position of saying anybody who accuses Donald Trump of anything must therefore be part of the deep state swamp and must be, kicked out of office? Well,
I agree that kind of knee-jerk association without any evidence is in fact a dangerous position to be in, and not something I think either I or we or the Republican Party or anybody else, as that matter, should find themselves in a position where just because somebody's attacking Donald Trump, that automatically means they're wrong. But if you want to look at the actual evidence of what has actually happened, you could make a pretty damn good case for it, Scott. You know, if you really want to just lay the evidence out on the table, you look at the absolute allegations, the number of allegations, the kind of allegations, you throw in Brett Kavanaugh to the mix because they won't let him sit down and ever rest from this again either. You look at this constant ongoing harassment of Trump and Trump's appointees, and you begin to determine a pattern here. And the pattern is not a fake pattern. It's not a make-believe pattern. It's not an invented pattern.
But the pattern also doesn't prove that any individual allegation is false.
No, it doesn't, Scott. But when you have enough points in a line, you can certainly determine a trend. And the trend I'm seeing here is that people are speaking up about off the cuff kind of, oh, well, I heard this or I saw that or so on. And it never, ever ends. And the one thing I have not seen since the beginning of this entire process is any form of actual evidence that the president did something illegal.
Well, in this case, the president is actually copping to what they say he did. In essence, he's saying, yes, the conversation happened. Yes, I was talking to the Ukrainian president. Yes, I asked him to investigate, among other things, in corruption, but it specifically multiple times this issue regarding former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. That's not in dispute. Rudy Giuliani even told Maria Bartiromo that he couldn't be 100% sure that the president didn't discuss any connection between funding from the U.S. government and this kind of corruption investigation. And so what I'm saying here, Bill, is that in large part, the facts of the matter have been acknowledged by the accused.
So what? What facts? You know what's happened here? I'll tell you what's happened here. It's crystal clear what's happened here. Hunter Biden, almost certainly, from the evidence available, took a deal with the Ukrainian government to influence the outcome of negotiations that were going on at the time his father was vice president.
Well, it looks more like Hunter Biden took the job so he could get $50,000 a month.
Well, maybe he did that too. So now, Scott, it's not about Hunter Biden. It's not about Joe Biden. It's not about Democratic influence peddling. It's not about collusion with the Ukraine or Russia or anything else. It's not about any of those things. Those are what the things are actually about, but it's not about any of those things. News story's got nothing to do with those things. News story isn't interested whether those things happen. The news story is interested in finding yet another reason to find Donald Trump guilty in absence of any evidence and to continue to do this never-ending, nonstop witch hunt kind of an atmosphere that's never let up. And it gets to the point where you begin to realize, given the number of times that these kind of charges have been brought against Trump and Kavanaugh and any other number of people that Donald Trump supports, when you see these charges come up again and again and again, and you see nothing actually come of them, you begin to determine that this is in fact a pattern. And since this particular allegation was raised by a government official who basically just felt like I had to come forward out of the goodness of my conscience. You say he's a straight shooter? They said James Comey was a straight shooter.
Now, I want to be clear about this.
I remember that
Bill,
term.
I want to be clear who we're talking about here. There's a whistleblower whose name we do not know, and then there's the Inspector General for National Intelligence. The Inspector General for National Intelligence is the one who said he brought this whistleblower's allegation forward because he thought it was significant and needed to be looked into. So whether the whistleblower himself was a straight shooter, we don't know. It's the Inspector General who's being described in that way.
Well, let me tell you one individual to whom the term straight shooter was applied on an hourly basis for weeks. And that person is James Comey. When James Comey was investigating Hillary Clinton's email scandal, the people on both sides of the issue were saying, well, at least James Comey's a straight shooter. He's a straight shooter. He's a straight up guy. You can trust him. How'd that work out? I don't buy it. And besides, whether the guy's a straight shooter or not, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. What matters is there evidence of illegal activities on the part of the president? And if the answer is no, which it certainly appears to be, then the fact that this is the thing that everybody's talking about over the entire weekend and not the fact that Hunter Biden was involved with this, then that tells me everything I need to know about this story.
Actually, I would respectfully suggest that the measure is not were there illegal activities, because as you know, the threat here really isn't the indictment of a sitting president. In fact, the guidance from the Justice Department is that would be an unlikely, perhaps unconstitutional thing to do. The question here is this enough to finally push people like Adam Schiff, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, over the edge in their reluctance to pursue impeachment? And it's starting to look like that. Pelosi hasn't gone all the way in on that, neither has Schiff, but both of them have said this raises serious, new, troubling questions, and this may be enough of an impetus, and they don't have to prove a crime to impeach a sitting president. That phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors, has had a broad meaning since the day it appeared in our Constitution. They could just prove that he was self-dealing in an effort to use the power of the presidency to benefit his own self.
And the evidence that they would presumably use to make this case to the House of Representatives would be some guy in the government said something that some other guy said you might want to look into.
No, it would actually be that phone call.
Oh, well, okay.
Well,
Donald Trump is
like
in
I
favor.
said, the president has acknowledged, and Rudy Giuliani, his personal attorney, has acknowledged.
Okay, so now it's clear. What difference does any of this make? Nancy Pelosi is, and the rest of these clowns can say this all the time. Don't you see this, Scott? This is why the story's here. The story's not here because there's any evidence. The story's not here because anything's going to come of it. The story is here because it allows Nancy Pelosi to say, well, now this raises some entirely new, very troubling aspects about the Donald Trump presidency. That's why it's here. That's what the story's for. It's why the story's running around. That's why everybody's hyperventilating about it. There's nothing there. There's certainly nothing actionable there. And for Nancy Pelosi to say, well, this raises some very serious questions that we need to look into, is not an indication she's going to launch impeachment proceedings in the House, because she knows that, number one, she won't get the whether or not she gets the actual articles of impeachment filed, there is no question whatsoever that Donald Trump isn't going to be impeached, because that decision is up to the Senate. And so the whole thing is one giant piece of kabuki. And I'm just bloody sick of it.
And so far, only one Republican senator has spoken out expressing his concerns about the incident, and that is Senator Mitt Romney, a man whose integrity you have often praised in the past.
I have praised Mitt Romney's integrity in terms of the quality of his life as an individual person that struck me as part of his life prior to getting into politics and so on. I don't have any particular problems with Mitt Romney. I know a lot of people do. But for Mitt Romney to say this is to say what? What exactly did he say?
I would be loath to paraphrase the tweet, but he didn't say the president should be impeached. He just said, if the president did this, this raises serious questions again that need further investigation.
Okay, Mitt, well, thanks for the help.
I'm loosely paraphrasing that.
Thanks for the help. It's well known that Mitt Romney can't stand Donald Trump. It's well known that Mitt Romney, like many other people in the Hollywood establishment, I get my demons mixed up sometimes. In the Republican establishment, don't like Donald Trump. So I can't exactly call this the kind of shock that would knock me out of my chair. But again and again and again and again and again, what we're seeing here is people firing pistols into the air. That's all it is. It's people running around going, doo, 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 making a lot of noise, making a lot of smoke and a lot of flash over nothing. They're not shooting at anything. They're just firing their pistols. And the net cumulative goal of all of this is to make sure that there's not one single hour of Donald Trump's presidency that he is not constantly under some kind of suspicion for some kind of acts that are certainly heinous, for which there is no proof whatsoever.
So is anybody on the Republican side who raises concerns about this or feels unsettled about the nature of the phone call or, frankly, the White House response since then, which has flip-flopped in a couple of directions? First, kind of denying that anything happened, then acknowledging it happened, and then sort of bragging about what the president was doing and saying there was nothing wrong with it. Is the Republican who raises concerns about that essentially an enemy of the conservative movement and should shut up and sit down?
I'm never in favor of shutting up and sitting down, but I would like to see a little more fundamental discretion and fundamental respect for the presumption of innocence on Mitt Romney's part and on the part of all the Democrats who are running around with this. I mean, that ship has sailed a long time ago. Am I saying that somebody who's saying, no, we really need to look into this is automatically trying to bring Donald Trump down? I'm not saying it's automatically trying to bring him down, but I'm saying if I had to bet, that's what I would bet. If I had to bet, I would say that Mitt Romney perceives it to be in Mitt Romney's interest that Donald Trump continue to take some heat for something for which I haven't seen any evidence for. So I don't really know if I completely understand the question, but the one thing I do know is that all of the talk that people made prior to the 2016 election about a deep state, about corrupt officials in the government, about the Republican establishment rather seeing Hillary Clinton elected than Donald Trump, all of those allegations, all of those rumors, which seemed ridiculous to me prior to 2016, have been proven to be true by actions and evidence, not by the fact that I suddenly felt differently about it. Actions and evidence have convinced me that there is a tremendously, unbelievably strong effort on the part of people in the government to prevent the American people from deciding their own destiny. And that makes me pretty damn angry, Scotty.
Well, certainly events are going to continue to move forward in this, new revelations practically by the hour. And we know, especially in these early hours, that much of what we're hearing now could turn out to be simply not so.
Or nothing.
But whatever the events are, as they go forward, we will continue to analyze not just what the White House does or what the Democrats who are assaulting President Trump do, but how the media reacts to this and what the consequences are for our country going forward. We appreciate the people who enable us to have these conversations. These are the stalwart members at BillWhittle.com. If you'd like to join them, we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, cheerful and rapid at that, but we don't have to do that very often. If you'd like to go to BillWhittle.com, just click that Become a Member link and find out what it's like to be a member. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this happen.